really fortunate tonight to have a special guest, Rob Milam. Rob, come on up. Rob has a degree in building science. He owns his own company in construction consulting. Kind of following in footsteps of his father Tim, who we all know. Rob's a very creative person. Creativity shows up professionally, but as you'll see tonight, it really shows up in the work he does in marquetry. Rob got started in marquetry a number of years ago. When did you?
2009.
2009. Okay. So been at it for a while. Started with a course he took from Paul
Schurch.
Yeah. What really strange spelling, but anyway, Rob's a really busy guy, as you can imagine, someone who owns their own company and is heavily involved. And so we really appreciate you taking the time tonight to tell us about marquetry.
Well, thank you very much, Gary. Thank you, Gil, for having me back. I'm really honored to be here. This is the second time I've stood up here to talk about marquetry that I frankly don't remember when it was several years ago, the first time.
More, yeah.
But before I move into my presentation, I want to make a comment to your about passing on passion for the next generation. My father, Jim, I've got two sons, one of whom has caught the passion, but it's been in an indirect route. And what I learned in the process is to find a project that he's interested in, find something where woodworking is a means to an end. I can try to teach him how to build a box or a table, but he doesn't care about boxes and tables. He's got more of those than he needs. A skateboard, slingshot, a fly rod, a gun stock. Find out what he's interested in, find out what they're interested in, and develop a project that becomes a means to that end. Right now, Bo is into whitewater kayaking is his deal. And so what's on his plate anytime he has a spare moment is building a paddle, a laminated bent shaft, twisted and bent shaft with blades made of polymer honeycomb material and composite layups and aramid and all this stuff, vacuum bagging and composite layups. So it's fascinating. It's fun to watch his passion develop. But it's all because he wanted to build a paddle. He didn't want to build furniture. So find what tickles the itch. I picked up marquetry in 2009. Paul Schurch taught me how in a 1-week class. I knew then what marquetry was, surface decoration, primarily on furniture, is really the only context I'd ever seen it. But just during that week, I got the notion that I wanted to do something different with it. And I frankly wasn't interested in building furniture to decorate it. Give me a piece of MDF and we'll decorate that and hang it on the wall. So it became the human face, the craft of portraiture, and which was an extension of photography, which I was interested in, by no means an expert at, but I learned some things about lighting and exposure, and applying that to marquetry helps me to to refine what I'm looking at, being able to look at a human face and analyzing the light patterns and highlights and shadows and whatnot. What I developed is a process for taking a photograph and turning it into a marquetry piece. So what you'll see continuous refinements on a process. So I'm going to talk to you today about really design, pre-construction design, and how I get from raw color photograph to this end. I'm talking about design and layout, and particularly on color separation and veneer selection. What I learned is it's a photograph, a color photograph has in it 256 colors, and that's too many. I can't if you gotta represent every one of those with a piece of wood, that's too much to handle, so. Let's reduce the number of colors. It became clear that colors themselves were complicated, you know, hues representing blue, pink. I don't, you know, became difficult, so what I learned is converting an image to black and white. Simplified the issue, simplified the puzzle dramatically. So process, I'm not gonna explain how to, I don't frankly remember how to do this. It's posterized, taking a color photograph and reducing it from 256 colors to a manageable number. In this case, I believe it was, I don't know, 16 maybe, which was still too many. That was the last one I ever did, that was reduced to 16. Ultimately, I found that, you know, 4 colors is enough. So anyway, with a Photoshop or photo processing software tool, you can posterize any photograph. So the first step is to convert it to black and white and then posterize it, reduce it to as many colors as you can, as you want to animate. So when you start reducing, when you posterize, you start seeing lines, contour lines, and it becomes like a topo map. And then to apply a blur filter to the photograph makes those lines a little bit smoother, a little bit easier to handle. So in this case, I blurred it enough to make those lines, you know, fair curves, reasonably straight curves and lines. Without the blur filter, the lines become really jagged and really hard to cut, as we're going to see on the scroll saw. You know, that you'd rather cut a straight line or a nice long fair curve. It results in a lot less cursing and a lot less lost pieces of wood. My process went from this posterized black and white image to an overlay tracing paper, where I took some liberties with the pencil lines too. I didn't religiously follow those lines. I cut out the sharp corners when I felt like it was appropriate, and kept the sharp corners where they needed. Around details around eyeballs, for instance, need to be sharper than details around cheeks and other, you know, facial structures. So I built a light table, I laid the posterized photograph down, a piece of tracing paper. And once I got that, then I would take it to a print shop and generate several poster-sized copies in full size. I need the picture to represent the actual full size of the finished work that I want to produce. Now, in this case, I think 16 colors, 16 light values, as I'm going to call them, and I had to then decide on a method to select 16 veneers that would correlate to those 16 light values, light to dark. So it was extraordinarily difficult. I didn't ever do that again. I found, you know, 4 is enough, and 4, frankly, became a good standard for a lot of my work after that. So in this case, what I would do is I would choose the lightest veneer I could find or wanted to use, and the darkest, and then mathematically arrive at the light values for the middle 2 veneers. And so in a demonstration that we're going to do in a few minutes, it's got a project of 5 values. So I went ahead and created a color value map to pre-select the veneers that we're going to use. And it's all mathematically derived. So we started the lightest veneer that we're going to use in this case is maple. I normally would start with maple or holly. Holly's a good bit whiter, and then for the darkest veneer, I chose Wingay, which is one of my favorites because it's dark, it's stable, color-wise, not structurally. So with a camera, with a DSLR and a Photoshop, I suppose you could do it with a light meter as well. You can get a reading on what's that color, what's that light value really worth numerically? So what we have are, I determined that for this project, maple at a value of 142, that's the lightest. If 0 is pure black, pure white, 256. Maple would be 142. I mean, it varies wildly. I've got several maple samples and there's a pretty wide range of light value even within the same species. So 142 with maple, Wingate is 29. And then so just by division, we can arrive at the other intervals for the middle three veneers. So I chose Sapele at 57 for veneer number 2, cherry for number 3 at 65, and white oak at 113. So I've got an array of 5 shades that are reasonably consistent intervals between the 5. Okay.
What did you say, white?
Pardon me?
Said white, like pure white.
256.
You worry at all about the grade pattern?
Yes, well, the grain, not so much the direction, I mean. What I do worry about is color, color variations like in zebra wood, for instance. It's a light colored wood with some really dark stripes, and how does that represent? And I used Brazilian rosewood, the upper right hand corner of this one, and it's really stripy. It turned out to work. I was just lucky really that it works like that. So getting a sample that's, I don't know, reasonably monolithic with its color within the same piece of wood is useful. Not, it's okay to have variations. I think that's the same rosewood I used in the image on the screen. So it's hard to nail down a real color, a real light value on veneer like that. Now, an issue I struggle with is color shifting, changing hue and changing brightness. Okay, so I found some veneers that I will never use again, like tulip poplar. This one has tulip poplar right there, lower cheek, and above the eyebrow, it's green, which is not a great choice, but it doesn't stay green. It turns dark, darkish greenish brown. So the contrast doesn't work after UV light gets after it. So this has been hanging on the wall since 2010. It's had plenty of time to shift. A few veneers that I like a lot that tend to be stable. The darker ones tend to stay dark. Wingate's always been, rosewood stays dark. Maple is okay, it darkens. They all darken a little bit, but some are worse than others. I have I don't know where I found this. It's a table that somebody else created that with a list of a bunch of species and their tendencies to darken. I'm happy to share it if you want to come up here and take a picture of it. But anyway, I found, that even with a little bit of shifting, 4 values tends to be the best combination. There's enough contrast from one to the next where a little bit of shifting is not going to hurt so much. Look at this. The colors compared to this. I mean, it's just, I know I don't have to tell you about color shifting, but it happens, and it's a sad reality. Yes, sir.
The red that is in her hair
Mhm.
that turned basically a dark brown. What's that species? Oh, you got the the dark stripe and then a lot of the right.
I don't know.
I'm just curious to see that shift is clear, and I was just curious to understand that.
I can find it when I get home, but I can't tell you. I mean. A lot of the veneers that I've used were bought in a box, you know, a veneer, excuse me, a marquetry variety pack. Okay.
No labels.
With no labels, so I did my best to identify what was in there, but I'm sure I'm wrong on a lot of them. On species identification. So, all right, here's what I want to do. I'm gonna build a packet. But by the way, packet cutting is the method. So if you're not familiar with what that means, it means we're gonna stack up a bunch of veneers, staple them together, and cut the whole packet straight through with a scroll saw. And then we're gonna have ultimately a stack, in this case, of each of these shapes are gonna be cut out. We're gonna have 5 copies of each shape. And 5 different colors. We're gonna use one and throw the rest of it. I'm gonna work on that in a moment. But first, I'm gonna show you how to build a packet. There's another more precise cutting method called double bevel cutting that I've never tried because I just don't have the time and the patience for such things. Yes, sir.
If you break up the packets. If anybody has a question, just raise your hand, I'll give the mic to you. When you build your packets for this picture here, it's roughly what, 16 by 20, say? You do it in quarters and make, because the veneer, you're not gonna find a sheet, big, you know, one sheet to do that whole thing. And you'd have a hard time on the scroll saw cutting the pieces out. So where do you, or how do you decide where you make your break for your packets that will overlap? Or join up together?
That's a good question. I don't break them up. My packet was, 24. It was big. I made a packet that the size of this plus a margin of an inch at least on each side. And what I would do, 2 challenges: finding a piece of veneer that's continuous and big enough. Maybe not, but you can create a piece of veneer. I mean, I can take, give me 3 pieces of white oak. I can splice and tape them together and make it look, it's as good as a, 3-foot wide solid piece of white oak. So that's what I would do if I needed a continuous large piece of veneer. For small projects like this one, that's not necessary. The other challenge is cutting a big packet on a scroll saw with, I don't know, mine's got a 26-inch throat. It's bigger than that one. It's still not big enough to handle I've done a couple of pieces that were, 36 inches square, and the strategy then is really to be strategic about where you start cutting. Where I would start in this one, for instance, is to find a line, basically a continuous line all the way down from one side to another. That's my first cut. Cut that one all the way down. Then you've got 2 much smaller packets to work with. I'm gonna build a pack out of these 5 veneers. So, Rob, quick question. Yes, sir.
How do you hide your curves?
I hide them with glue, the brown colored formaldehyde glue. Come up and look afterwards, you can see the curves, but you get the right color glue, it fills, and it's good enough. Take care to, to try to make the joints as uniform as possible. It helps. But I mentioned double bevel cutting that completely hides curves, but I haven't. I don't know. And this piece right there had, I don't know, 1,100 pieces in it. I don't, to do every one of those with a double bevel cut method would have taken an eternity. So every piece of veneer in the packet needs to be bound at least on one side with gum tape and veneer tape. So I've got Wenge I already did. I found the peely and the cherry. And I'm gonna do the same now with the white oak first. That's way more oak than I need, so I'm gonna get out my veneer scissors. 2-inch gum tape. Wet sponge. And with a brass brush. Make sure I've got full adhesion. All the way around. Some of these veneers, if I was cutting really small, intricate pieces with sharp edges, sharp corners, for instance. Some of these veneers would have a tendency to splinter and fall apart, winging, for instance. If we're not gonna have that issue with this simple cutting pattern here, but if I did, what I would do is find the other side, the blue face with blue painter's tape. So that way the pieces might break apart, but they're still gonna stay together and you can at least find your pieces and made them back together.
You said the painter's tape would go on the side of the sleeve, the glue.
That's right. Right, the glue face, the gum tape is gonna be the show face. The bare side is the blue face. Here's the image that I'm trying to recreate. That's gonna stand up, is it? Nope. So the second color veneer, the darker wing is the black one. The second tier veneer would be the one that covers the background. So what I want to do is create a packet with the show face on top to just start stacking up these veneers. So here's, let's see, Wenge is going to be this piece down here, so I want to arrange that so that I got full coverage on that. Let's see, cherry, white oak, and maple right there. Cherry, white oak, and maple. And then another piece of cardboard on the back of that. For a packet this small, stapler is this office stapler made for drawing is big enough. It's got a throat. It's maybe 3.5 inches, which is plenty for this. On a larger piece, such as that, such as these, I would staple around the perimeter, but I need to secure in the field quite a bit. And my stapler doesn't have a throat deep enough to do that, so I would use finish nails. I think these are, I don't know, 23 gauge
And nails.
headless, gun nails. Pinch them off, hold them with tweezers, drive them in with a hammer. Bend them over with an hammer. Clench it. I want to make sure that in this case, every one of those pieces of veneer that I put in there have at least 2 staples in it, so they don't rotate. I probably accomplished that. We'll see. So here's one that I pre-assembled, and then I'm gonna cut this on the scroll saw. So this, to start. There's, again, you've got to be strategic about cutting. You want to start. You don't want to sabotage yourself by, cutting out cutting out the large outline, and then all the pieces fall apart in front of you before you're finished cutting. So you want to start in the middle. You want to find the center, the smallest center piece, cut that out, and keep moving in an outward pattern. The eyeballs, for instance, we notice, this became critical to be, strategic about what you cut first and what you leave intact. So to start a cut, I'm going to identify where I want to begin, and in this case, I want to start right there at this point. And to do that, I'm going to use a dental pick. I'm not going to use a drill. I got to put a hole in there, but a drill bit is actually going to remove material. I don't want to remove any material. I just want to separate it enough so that I can get a double lock scroll saw blade. So I'm going to use a dental pick to make a hole right at that spot. Only big enough to thread the scroll saw blade through. So now I'm going to cut these 2, 3, 4 pieces out.
What's that?
Double lock, skip tooth. Okay, so 5 copies of the same shape. Almost. Wing it in quite. It's okay, it's trashy. Cut number 1.
For small projects like this, I know it's heresy here in woodworking field. Have you ever considered using a cricket?
A what?
Cricket. It's a CNC cutting tool that you can buy. And you cut veneers and then continue with cut.
Yes, I've considered. I didn't know that was called cricket.
It's, you only have to cut one layer, then have to cut like a waste or whatever it is.
That's,
And-
yes, that's
And if you
a
go
great
fast-
idea. It's fast, it's more precise, the curve is smaller.
Yeah, it's just for smaller projects. I mean, you can only cut one piece. One piece would only be one section.
I'm
I mean,
gonna,
that's pretty big.
I'm gonna speak more to that point in a minute after we get this one cut. Piece number 2, number 3. And now I want to, I would like the sapele to be continuous through this little gap right there, but I'm gonna have to break it just by a saw curve, and with the dark colored glue, it will be imperceptible. So we have 5 pieces, five shapes and 5 different.
Rob, what
Varieties.
Rob, what kind of paper are we using for the pattern? Are you using some heavyweight paper for the pattern?
It's just printer, it's just standard printer paper. If I need a print that's bigger than what I can print at home on my 8.5 by 11, just a print shop on the cheapest bond paper they have is good enough for this purpose. So now we're gonna take apart the packet and pull the staples out and assemble. All right, so Sapili is the one that I wanted to use for the back. So what we're gonna do is assemble this puzzle with, first with blue painter's tape on the blue face. And once we have it assembled, then we're gonna rebond the back side of the show face, if we get with another layer of gum tape. I think I'm gonna have so I can see what I'm looking for. I'm looking at it in reverse in here and it's just kind of hard to see. So there's the maple, white oak is the second level. Will be this piece, area, that one, see. This piece broke. But because it's got gum tape on it, the broken piece is just right there, it folds back in place and all's good. And then lastly, we have Wingate for the shadow. I need a legend in order to put this thing back together. Because the 5 pieces, it's pretty easy to figure out, but if it has 1,100 pieces. I need to print a legend that is in the reverse, a mirror image of the one I'm starting with, because you really want to be working on the glue face. The glue face is the side you want to see. That's where you can see your colors through veneers.
So if you had 200 pieces or whatever, you need to number them. And come up with a system of locating where you can find the number you're looking for. And then you have a number and map. So you know by the proposal together.
You are correct.
None of this necessary with 5 pieces.
All right, so there we have it roughly. And in this step, really what I want to do is get the curves as uniform as possible. Well, big gaps like that are not acceptable when we move these pieces. We're eliminating large gaps. We're gonna have gaps, but I just want them to be, if they're uniform, then they'll be as small as narrow as possible. The glue, it's the piece is assembled, the glue face is what we're looking at now. Can't glue it with blue tape on it though, so what we're gonna do is bind the show face again with another application of gum tape. Right here. So that I can strip the blue tape off the back. I have to mention that this 3M authentic blue painter's tape is the only thing to use. Don't buy a Home Depot knockoff tape, it's garbage. It won't stick. You'll be sorry.
Question,
Yes, sir.
on your larger pieces, what would you estimate your time to do those pieces?
That one, 60 hours. It's hard to answer, because I mean, that was a learning process. That is the second piece I did. I was just figuring out how things work. If I did that same exact thing again, it would be less than 60 hours, but I wouldn't do that again. How long did that take? Is that your question? I think on the scroll saw, I think I had this whole thing cut out on the scroll saw in an hour. That one, both of these were several days on end in schools.
Two questions. One, could you feasibly invert your colors with the scrap? Since you've already cut it out, the barriers for that outside of compartmentalizing the color on one particular part. If you use full sheets, I think you can do that.
Yeah. You can, yes, you would have to use full sheets to make that work. Because as you saw, some of these waste pieces are incomplete pieces. It wouldn't work if you didn't have it. If you didn't have that in mind to start. And I'll show you one on the computer in a minute where that was.
What are some of the landmines in this part right here? I mean, obviously it's gotta get cut well. What do you have to troubleshoot, as you put these together?
Larger pieces, larger works with a lot of complexity and a lot of small parts present their own land. So care and organization of, marking, identifying the pieces, storing them so that you can find them later. Grain of rice, tiny. And so I would lose, I lost a lot of pieces. On my scroll saw at home, I built a tray, a dust catcher tray that sat below the table. These pieces would fall in the throat and the hole all the time. You could spend hours looking for them, but I had, I built a catcher so that I knew where to find it. So that's the land, that's a big landmine. Organization's the biggest challenge. I mean, I'll show you.
You sweep the floor before you do this, not after.
Right. I don't have a map, but it's so. I told you when I get a print, when I get a pattern, I would take it to the print shop and I get 3 copies made. One copy is to glue to the packet face. Okay. Another one is a working piece like this where I would use it to identify what pieces, what kinds of veneer, what varieties I want in each location. The third one would be a cutting map where every time I cut a piece of the scroll saw, I end up with a handful or a fingerful. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to find it later? Well, I would number that cut, number 375, and I would write it on the map. And then I would place it in my box. That's how organized I am. So I have a cabinet, a plywood cabinet at home that's got 40 of these boxes in it. Every one of those cells is numbered. So I would take my cut pieces with the surgical tweezers, drop them in the box and slide them to 346, and then I go back to the map and write 346 on the map location and put it back in the cabinet. And I still have know where these are, cut pieces from the last one I finished in 2015 and went back to where they're on. How useful is that?
Rob, you can actually go back and make, if you have a packet of 6 different veneers, you could actually make 6 different versions of that same piece, right? Just different colors and different lights, what you're able to.
You could. It would really only make sense in two ways.
Yeah.
The negative, photographic negative version, because I mean, what would happen if you put the darkest veneer in the middle veneer position? I mean, if you can do it, it would look, for what that's worth, I wouldn't spend time. Scroll saws are out, laser cutters are in. I found a guy, a client allowed me to use his laser machine, and I made a simple CAD drawing and threw a few veneers in his laser cutter, and in about 30 seconds, it spit out enough to do that with perfect cuts, curves that are smaller, tighter, and more uniform than anything that we created in school. So, problem is you have to start with a CAD drawing, and I struggle with how do I make a CAD drawing out of this? I don't really, I never figured that part out. Nor did I ever buy a laser cutter.
So using a laser cutter to do that, are you ever able to get the beam of the lasers small enough to where you don't have a curve issue? Did that make sense?
Yeah, the question makes sense for sure. I didn't try, because I only had access to a machine for a couple of hours. I didn't really have time to. What I had time to do was to adjust the beam so that it would cut but not burn excessively. I think in some of these you can detect a slight burn along the edges of some of these pieces. It's nearly on notes. It's negligible. And the largest last time I looked, laser cutter that was appropriate would barely be big enough to fit a piece this size. And $8,000. So I want to just talk. I can't demonstrate the rest. And talk about what I'm going to do with this. This gets glued to a piece of MDF. And I would use I think it's called Pro Wood. It's a urea formaldehyde water catalyzed powder. It's available in a white or blonde color and a dark color. I always use the dark color because it fills the gaps, and then you're in discipline. Yes, sir.
Okay, here's the password. You ready? Shop Woodcraft.
It's
Woodcraft.
Oh yeah, here we go. Here's the legend map for that piece. Where I would rate.
Hey, Rob, do you use any sand?
Pardon me?
Do you ever use sand shading on your?
Yes, not a lot.
Sand shading?
Sand shading. So I would do sand. The only place I did any sand shading was on the eyeballs, the irises. Okay, so I would use colored veneer for the irises on both of these, and to mute the edges of the iris. So sand shade just the outside edge of the iris. That's the only place I used it.
And Rob, you remember the Secret to Showing Life by Paul Schurch?
The secret to showing life
In the eyes, just
No.
put in a glint.
Oh, yeah, I did that. It's kind of dull down there. I'm going to show you a piece where I created the negative image. All right.
Cool. Really cool.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. When were those photos made?
2009.
I have those two. I have these two originals in my house, and the darker one. The color shift is so wide that it's virtually ruined the piece. And theoretically, you can scrape the finish off and rejuvenate it, but you run the risk of cutting through the veneer.
Is it in the sun, Jim?
No, it does. Any UV light will do it.
I haven't put it to the test, but I would speculate that if you created a piece and put it in a dark room, in a completely dark closet and left it there for a very long time, it wouldn't shift.
It's outside the fog.
Hey, Rob, just take a picture of it when you're done and hang it on your wall.
I have made, over a long period of time, a couple of hundred, at least, segmented ornaments, Christmas type ornaments. And I've had color shift problems with those. And I've actually put sunscreen on them. Postponed the color shift, but it will not stop it.
But there's no way to stop it.
There's no way to stop it, except put it in the dark.
Yeah, you're black.
Most people won't put my work anyway.
So I bought, there's a dealer called Certainly Wood. The pun is intended. Who sells veneer, I think that's all they sell. And I bought several boxes of what they market as marquetry. And I don't know if I don't, last time I checked, you couldn't specify. I mean, if you're gonna get that pack, you just get what you get. It's a grab bag. So I bought a bunch of those. Where I found through that learned a bunch, found a bunch of veneers in a species that I never heard of before. The red one that you asked about earlier is one of those. I still don't really know what that is. I created samples of everything I had, glued up on an index card size piece of MDF, and analyzed every one of them with a light meter. And so I've got them arranged on a palette on my wall according to their light value, with the lightest holly at the top left, and it's actually a Brazilian rosewood at the bottom. But I've gone back and reevaluated all of them several times and record the new light meter reading on the back. So I can see there, it is what it is now, but it might not look like that a year from now. And, I've got them arranged according to the latest, frankly, the most recent light value, which are printed on the front. So I figure this, if they hang on the wall for 10 years and experience enough UV light, they'll stop shifting eventually and they'll stabilize, and they can eventually get it.
What it will,
Consistent light. What
it will be,
Right,
what it will end up.
exactly. I don't know if that's darker than winged or not. It's a Brazilian rosewood that came from Certainly Wood. No, excuse me, it came from Carlton McClendon. I got a pretty big bowl of this stuff, and it's so dark and rich, and it hasn't shifted a bit.
I have a general question. What is the difference between marquetry and person?
I think somebody else might have a better answer than me here, but marquetry is always dealing in veneers, and thin cardstock thickness veneers. And tarsia is, you're dealing in thicker pieces of wood that it's three-dimensional, fit together as contours. I think that's the case.
The edges are
I thought we got about the shading.
Okay.
different heights, so you get a thredimensional effect.
All right, I want to quickly tell you how I finish, how I assemble, and I mentioned I would glue up this wood urea formaldehyde on a piece of MDF. I would do the same to the backside with a solid piece of the cheapest veneer I could find. I've got an endless supply of white oak and walnut that I would use for that. The same glue, the same thickness veneer on both sides. And then after, and I would put it in a vacuum bag. I got a vacuum bag with a perforated platen I would cut a MDF caul for both sides of this and bind up the whole thing with tape so it doesn't shift, so it's a pretty thick assembly. The workpiece caul on both sides, and actually on top of that, a piece of canvas, a heavy cotton duck canvas on this surface to compensate for any variations in the thicknesses of the veneers. That, because, I mean, I try to buy all the same 1/40th, but it's not, there are variations, so that duck canvas compensates for that. After the glue cures, I'll take it out of the vacuum bag, table saw the square cuts on the edges, edge bait it. Again, with whatever, with, you know, veneer, this has got weighting on it, on the edge. And then a couple of coats of shellac, a couple of coats of clear spray lacquer, all from an aerosol can. I mean, I don't have a spray booth, I don't have a sophisticated spray system, it's just aerosol cans.
Before you get the veneer tape off your. Mike.
No. Good point, good question.
Ask the
Well, the question was, the veneer tape has to come off before the finish goes on.
I missed a step, so. After it comes out of the vacuum bag, I saturate the surface with water, and that deactivates the gum tape. Scrape it off with a putty knife, and then and then sand it. You know, with a belt sander if I need to, which is risky. That's risky. But so I'm batting 1,000 so far with the belt sander. I haven't burned through a piece yet. Not.
What grit type?
80 grit. 40.
Put it through the planer.
But he goes very lightly.
Yeah. Paul Schurch taught me how to use the belt sander. I mean, that was one of there was a lot of valuable lessons in that class, but belt sander ethics was one of an important one.
For someone who's just starting out, what would you recommend they do first? I mean, in terms of take a course or do this or do that, or just jump into it?
Take a course if you can. I don't think they're easy to come by, but I would suspect that you can learn a whole lot on YouTube, right? I mean, it wouldn't. It's a low cost. There's a low barrier to entry, and the cost of the tools and materials is rather low. The scroll saw the vacuum press and the scroll saw would be the most, capital outlay you would have for that. You know, for $100, you can buy enough veneer to have fun for a year. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming out.
A pleasure.
Appreciate that.